You can take a flower, roll it up and make it fine. Sprinkle it with knowledge and a little bit of time. Cover it with headlines and a sweet euphoria too. Cannabis man, cannabis man, cannabis man. Spreading news and joy across the land. Diving deep into the growing green. Cannabis man, we're all keen.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Cannabis Man podcast. Thank you so much for clicking on the show. I am your host, Don Kleppen. And if it's first time here, welcome. This is a podcast, if you will, where I've had a bunch of people say that over the years. I'm trying to take a more journalistic look at legal cannabis as it expands in states around America and countries around the world. Cannabis was prohibited officially in 1937 with the Marijuana Tax Act, and so we're just about a century into that prohibition, but it's a plant that was used by humans for thousands of years before that. We even had some archaeological evidence uncovered this year where it was a funeral in Asia 2,500 years ago, and they found remnants of indica, the cannabis plant, used at that funeral. So lots of evidence over the years that we have made use of this plant for a long time. And yet, over the course of the last nearly a century now, there was a lot of propaganda. There was a lot of marketing by the federal government, by the original FBI, people like Henry Anslinger. I also read about Joseph Randolph Hearst, the newspaper mogul who had a vested interest in squashing hemp because it was a competitor to paper. And then, of course, getting into the 70s with Richard Nixon, and trying to maintain his popularity after the Vietnam War and going after various communities and using his war on drugs to target them. There is a lot of history there. There's a lot of water under the bridge in terms of cannabis and human beings, but it's an exciting time right now in 2025. There's been a lot of movement over the last decade in terms of legalizing it recreationally. Plenty of states and countries have done so medically, acknowledging the medical benefits of the plant, whether they be things like helping people get to sleep at night, restoring an appetite among cancer patients, people fighting anxiety or stresses, helping people focus, dealing with chronic body pain. All of these things have shown to be helped by patients using cannabis plants. Now, I've been doing this show for 3 years, and it has been a lot of fun in that time. This show has grown to one of the top podcasts in the world. Platforms like Good Pods have named it among their top 100 in various categories, and the platform Listen Notes has acknowledged this is one of the top 10% of podcasts worldwide, and they estimate that there are well over 5 million podcasts out there, probably more than that. So it's been a heck of a journey. I really appreciate everyone who's kind of helped me along with it, but I want to make clear, as I do as often as I can, I am not here saying that cannabis is right for everybody. I don't believe that it's a miracle drug that's a panacea for all of life's issues. My argument is simply that we have a lot of substances that are totally legal and normalized, like alcohol, like caffeine, sugars, cigarettes for a long time. My ultimate stance here is, why are those so normalized and allowed as a regular part of society, and cannabis is still stigmatized and sort of kept at arm's length, even to the point where people who are using it as productive members of society still feel the need to hide it from the rest of the world because it is so stigmatized. That, along with the fact that I am a broadcaster in Chicago with the skills to create a podcast on my own, and a personal cannabis user of 20 years now, who did find in my late teens that it helped me get to sleep and stay asleep at night, which is something I'd always struggled with. That led me to keeping cannabis as a part of my life. And a few years ago, when it was legalized recreationally in Illinois, where I am here in Chicago, I decided that I wanted to bring the information and perspective that I have, along with experts in the space, to a wider audience. And that was the genesis for the show. The experts I'll talk with on this show Could be scientists or doctors who are studying the plant or prescribing it medically to patients. I'll also talk with politicians who create or enforce laws in newly legal states. Entrepreneurs, people who have goods or services in legal cannabis that we're all getting to try in legal spaces now. Or journalists and other media people who are covering this like myself. And I have one such guest, another podcaster, along with me today. This is somebody who's been in the space for a while, a fellow advocate, and has put on a few different podcasts out there. He is Pat Helmers of the Cannabis Advocate podcast. And so this is an episode you might be into, not only if you're a fan of cannabis and a supporter of legalizing the plant and the normalcy of it and all of this, but if you've ever thought about starting a podcast for yourself, if you're interested in kind of what goes into it, some perspective from guys that have gone through it for a couple of years now, you're going to want to stay tuned for this interview because Pat and I go through a lot, not just what, our backgrounds and what we've learned and how exciting the cannabis space is, but what we have learned over years of podcasting, some of the lessons that both of us have taken away from it. Maybe you'll find some value in that perspective as well. And if you would be so kind, and if you haven't already, please leave a rating or a review for this podcast. If you're hearing me right now on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, there's a way you can leave reviews, you can leave comments. Make sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss any new episodes. All of that is much appreciated. You can also follow the show on social media for updates. It's C-Man Podcast on X and Blue Sky and Instagram, and it's the Cannabis Man Podcast Facebook page and YouTube channel. You can also reach out via the show phone line. Send a text or leave a voicemail at 872-269-2403. I bring up a lot of topics across these episodes. I also will review products, and as I'm talking with these experts, if any questions occur to you that I haven't asked yet, if there are any guests you think I should talk with, or any products you think I should try, always happy to hear from you, and if you engage with the show, you might hear yourself played on the next episode of the Cannabis Man Podcast. So we got a lot to get to, including some events coming up and some news stories along with my guest interview, so let's open it up.
This is Tommy Chong, and you're listening to the Cannabis broadcast.
And here we are. Very happy that you're joining me here. If you've listened before or if this is your first time, either way, I can't tell you how much it means to me that you are checking this out. There's a lot of podcasts out there. There's plenty of content in general that you could be giving your attention to, using to fill up your day, and just kind of giving some time and focus on. And I'm just so thrilled that you're here with me listening to this right now. I'm also thrilled to give a couple of shout outs. I've been trying to share some more personal news and just kind of give you some perspective about what my life is like over these last few episodes. And it's something that I want to try and do more because there is plenty that goes on for all of us. And I myself have a rather large family. I'm very, very fortunate in that regard. I feel quite wealthy in terms of socialization because I was born into a large family. I've got one brother, 4 sisters, 2 stepbrothers, 2 half-brothers, and a stepsister. So that makes me one of 11, counting all of them. And then, of course, we've all got, cousins and aunts and uncles and stuff like that. So it's just a large group, and there is always news with such a large group. Everybody's lives are moving all the time. And so I wanted to give a very special shout out to my cousin Matt McHugh, who got married over this past weekend out in Santa Barbara to the lovely Anna. My mom was out there. My godmother, Aunt Dee Dee, who is Matt's mom, they flew out to be a part of the small ceremony. And then there's a large luncheon for the full family to kind of celebrate this wedding for them together, which is coming up in a couple of weekends. I'm very, very excited to celebrate with my cousin Matt. It's been a long journey, and we've hung out so much over the course of our lives. And Gretchen and our wedding anniversary is coming up later this month on the 11th, and we just got married 2 years ago. So I'm just so thrilled that my cousin Matt tied the knot over the weekend. Congratulations, Matt and Anna. wishing you both the very best. Have a great time on your honeymoon, and we'll celebrate in a couple of weekends. In addition to that, coming up this week, I'm recording this episode right now on June 2nd, Monday, and 2 days from now, my youngest sisters, who are twins, Melanie and Megan, they have a birthday coming up on June 4th. Always 10 days after my own birthday ever since they were born, and they embody the Gemini zodiac so perfectly as the twins that they are. Very excited to celebrate your birthday with you heads. Happy birthday. Hope you get some time off of work. Both of them work very, very hard, and they take very good care of their dog, Georgie, an adorable little pooch. So happy birthday, Mel and Meg. Looking forward to celebrating with both of you very soon. And on top of that, after that birthday, one of my other siblings, my stepbrother Danny, is also tying the knot. He is getting married to the lovely Anila. We are all going to be present at the ceremony on Saturday. It is an all-day affair. I am very excited for this, so is Gretchen. We're going to have Violet along for the ride, and we are actually going shopping later today for both of us to try and find some different outfits. So congratulations, Danny and Anila. We're both looking forward to celebrating with you and watching you guys tie the knot and just have a wonderful Saturday. Boy, there's nothing that beats a June wedding. I think this season is wonderful. Summertime is always great, but this month, for my money, is just one of the best to get married in. There's just something about the climate, something about the changeover from spring to summer. Flowers are in bloom, warmer temperatures, nice to be outside, and everybody's in a great mood. Lots to be grateful for, lots to look forward to. And I'm just happy to be along for the ride. Speaking of along for the ride, I've got some cannabis products here to tell you about. I will have some news stories to get to as well. And before I jump into these products, there is an event coming up next week. You may have heard me talk last year about the Benzinga conference. This is a global effort, Benzinga. They've got members all over the world, and it's really a great networking opportunity. It's a great chance for financiers, people who are looking to put their money in the cannabis space and try and help some businesses and brands off the ground. Benzinga is one of the best conferences for that every year. This year, it's at one of the hotels on the Mag Mile in Chicago. It's next week. I believe it's running from the 8th to the 10th, and there is an after party. There are several after parties, in fact, but there is one particular one that I will be attending on the 9th, and I will be talking more about that in a special bonus episode, which is out later this week. But if you haven't had a chance to get to the Benzinga conference, I believe some tickets are still available. So if you're in or around the Chicago area and a great networking event in the cannabis space like this sounds good to you, just search for the Benzinga conference. It'll take you to a website and you can get your tickets there. And I'll talk about that after party later this week. For now, let me tell you about some cannabis products that I've been trying this week. These are some gummies from my friends at Extract Labs. I'm going to be speaking with their CEO coming up soon here, but they were kind enough to send me a couple of different edible products that they have. They have some CBD gummies in strawberry flavor, and one of my favorite things about these, not only do they taste great, but 30 gummies come in a container, and these are a lot more emphasizing of the CBD. They're full spectrum and sugar-free, which is great, but these gummies have a lot more CBD in them than they do THC. 30 gummies total, 1,500 milligrams of CBD. So over the course of one serving, you get 50 milligrams of CBD in one gummy and less than 2 milligrams of THC, Delta 9, per gummy. So these are much more CBD friendly, but Gretchen and I have both been taking them. Gretchen loves them. They're good at the end of the day to kind of help you ease into sleep at night. Definitely gives you this mellow vibe and gets you a little bit silly, but nothing where you're kind of feeling overwhelmed. There's no risk of getting into that panicky place that I feel like if you overdo it with THC, sometimes you get there. I have never experienced that with any amount of CBD that I've taken. So I know some people hear that number, 50 milligrams, and it kind of feels like, oh my gosh, maybe that's a little too much. I have spoken with people who have said that we actually, as human beings, can probably tolerate a lot higher of a dose of CBD than anybody's aware of. They were suggesting maybe 500 milligrams of CBD might be something that more people could feel, which is why you tend not to feel anything if you're only taking CBD and you get something like 10 or 20 milligrams. Even these 50s, for me, it's such a mellow, subtle vibe change that it's not really something that I really get because my tolerance is a bit higher. But Gretchen doesn't really take many edibles or drinks much anymore. She'll take like a swig from some of my beverages if I'm having a seltzer or a soda or a lemonade or anything else with some THC in it. She might try that out, but she's not having one on her own. And when I do give her some products, they're usually around the 2 to 5 milligram range. So she's just been really enjoying these CBD gummies. And in addition to those strawberries, they've got some mellow, low-dose THC gummies in sour apple flavor. These are the ones that I've been getting on, and I love these. I love the sour apple flavor. Perfect for summer. Very much that sort of tart vibe that's just, perfect any time of the day, really. And because it's low dose, you get, looking at the serving size here on the nutrition label, you're getting 5 milligrams each in every gummy of CBD and THC. So again, nothing over the line, nothing where you're risking feeling too panicky. 5 milligrams of both of those really makes for another nice, subtle vibe. The main difference here is that you get a lot more CBD with the strawberry, and for me, the sour apple is a bit more of a pronounced flavor. It pops quite a bit, and I've really been enjoying that. The third jar that they sent me are not really cannabis. They are kava gummies, and you get 50 milligrams of kavalactones, or tones maybe. Kavalactones? Either way, however that's pronounced, you get 50 milligrams of those per gummy, and they say these are in the citrus flavor. But I did not taste citrus, and I'm actually going to try one. I've only taken one so far. I'm going to try one right now with you just to kind of give you a live reaction, because I had a strong reaction when I first tried these, and I want to see if maybe it was just the day that I had. So cheers to you, whatever you're doing, whenever you're listening to this. Hope it's a great day. Hope you're having a good start to the summer, wherever you are. And if you've got some cannabis on hand or nearby, a toast. Let's enjoy it together. Cheers. Okay. Oh, yeah, okay. So it was not just the day I was having. I do get citrus, now that I'm kind of focused on the flavor. I do get citrus, but there is an intense, bitter taste that goes along with that. And it kind of almost makes the top of my tongue feel a little bit numb. I don't know if you've ever done any cocaine, listener. I don't know if you have any experience with blow one way or the other. I've mentioned on the show once or twice that I did use that in my past. There was a summer in my late 20s, I believe, when a friend of mine, when I was living in Humboldt Park in Chicago, was selling it, and that was really the only time that in my life that I did have any kind of dalliance with it. But for those few months, I was, doing more than I should have, more than my fair share, let's say that. These kava gummies and this bitter taste on my tongue and the numbing function really puts cocaine in mind. Not the same vibe at all. I mean, these kava gummies, they are kind of teased. I've had stuff with kava before, and what it's really sold as is kind of a social lubricant. You may, if you listen to my past episodes, you might have heard me talk about the Fun Guy products. George Moulton, who started that company, they play well with cannabis and cannabis products, but he's really exploring more natural, plant-based things, especially in the fungal kingdom. And I tried some kava from some of his products. But I gotta tell you, if you are not expecting this is quite a bitter taste. And it's just something that you need to know going into this, even though it says citrus right on the front end here. It is a very unique sensation. I mean, the top of my tongue is still kind of numb. Maybe I shouldn't have done this as I'm recording a podcast, honestly. If I had given it more thought ahead of time, I wouldn't have done it. So you'll forgive me if I start, mush-mouthing as this podcast goes on. But either way, it's not too discouraging of a taste. It's not a kind of taste that I would avoid altogether. But compared to the strawberry and sour apple, this is just something that it's different. As I said, very bitter. The taste has faded now. So when I took it just a couple minutes ago there, it was a strong, bitter taste to go along with that undertone of citrus. Now the bitterness has kind of faded, but there's a little numbness that remains around my tongue, the top of my throat, and the lips even, where I first put that gummy in. Like the right side of my mouth is slightly numb. So it's just kind of an interesting sensation. And you should know it going into this, which I did not the first time I tried this. And that was kind of why I wanted to try it again here, to just see if my first reaction was valid or if it was just something I wasn't expecting. Now that I knew what to expect, I was able to taste the citrus a little more. And to be quite honest, I don't really notice much of a difference between these kava gummies and the mellow THC CBD ones, even though there's 50 milligrams of the kava in each gummy here. So it's a bit of a higher dose, but again, no cannabinoids in it. So let me know what you think. If you try some of these gummies from Extract Labs, tell me what your thoughts are on the strawberry CBD, the mellow sour apple, or the kava gummies. I would be curious to hear your experience of that. Again, you can dial that number, 872-269-2403. Call or text anytime. Now, let's move on to this week's expert interview.
I'm Pat Helmers, and this is the Cannabis Advocate Podcast.
And I'm Don Kleppen, and this is the Cannabis Man Podcast.
This is great. We met at Benzinga, right?
Yes, the Benzinga after party. Yeah, not the conference itself, but the after party at that homestead on the roof. You know, the bar that they had, kind of the food setup and the different, you know, cannabis booths and all the people there. And I believe you were having some pizza and I was lighting up a pre-roll and we just started talking.
And we did. We went out. There was nice. You could consume outside, which was super duper nice. It kind of goes to what one of the organizers. She's got a beef that lies. How come we have all these cannabis events and we're just sitting around drinking beer and wine? Why aren't we consuming cannabis?
Totally.
And she fixed that problem.
I know. I love it. I assume you're talking about Maddie, right? I'm talking
about Maddie.
Yeah.
She is wonderful.
The events, and I saw her again at the Best in Grass award ceremony, and she rolled up with the Sesh bus. And I was talking about it on an episode after the fact because I was saying the same thing you just did, which is sort of like, you know, we go to all these venues, but the permits, you know, the licenses in order to consume, like open consumption for cannabis, they're a nightmare, especially in the city limits of Chicago. So that's why you end up getting these cannabis events with more alcohol consumption. So
Right.
something like the Sesh bus is perfect because you're not supposed to consume publicly still here in Illinois. It's people do it. People have done it since well before it was legal.
And I think Chicago actually has a law that says they can't arrest anybody who is consuming on the street. You know, they don't uphold to that state law.
Well, totally. And I tell this story all the time, even before it went legal in Illinois here, Pat. You remember back in 2020. I was working downtown. This is probably 2015. And I had just gotten off of work. I was working at a law firm at the time, and my buddy and I went to a bar, and we were outside of it. He was smoking a cigarette. I was smoking my dugout. So I had just packed it. I hit it a few times. Chicago police squad car pulls right up, stops in front of us. Two guys get out of the car, two officers. One of them walks between my friend and I. We were standing 2 feet apart. He slides between us, turning toward me, and I had just exhaled a cloud of weed smoke. So he stepped right through that, looked me in the eye, didn't say anything, and just walked by, continuing on into the bar. And this is 2015. And so I knew right then that I was like, all right, if that didn't get me some kind of talking to, if that didn't get me into some kind of trouble, they're clearly not enforcing this. And this is before, as I said, it went legal.
Society is making progress.
But hopefully progress. I mean, I would say progress is definitely being made, right? Like, it's not where we all want it to be, but you can't deny the change from the 80s and 90s with the DARE education and the full propaganda of reefer madness still going, versus now where, like we said, you and I met at this party on the roof where there's open consumption, there's edibles all over the place, there's so much more tolerance, and it's not in a perfect place. I think people want decriminalization. We all want to see it moved from Schedule 1, but I feel like it's disingenuous to not acknowledge the real progress that's been made. It's very different now.
Yeah. What's fun about the connection with you and chatting with you, and that you're a podcaster too.
Yes, sir.
And actually, the next day, I actually met a guy who's a podcaster who I've not really followed up with. He didn't have a business card. I have a picture of his badge. But I think it's interesting that that the three of us are all trying to a certain degree. Well, I should probably let you answer this. Like, to a certain degree, is that promote this industry through this medium. How is podcasting? How is it that you got into podcasting?
Yeah, that's a good question, Pat. I mean, I come from radio. I went to Columbia College in Chicago back in 2009, 2011, and I was there for the 2 years, and I wanted to study voiceover. I did this open house program, and they had an educational certificate for voiceover, and I didn't even know what that was when I went to the open house. But voiceover, for anybody who doesn't know, is like the vocals on commercials or explainer videos on YouTube when somebody's narrating, audiobooks, video games, animations, all the vocal talent that you hear there. That's essentially voiceover work. So I wanted to study that, but in order to do that at Columbia, I needed to major in radio or TV. But I chose radio because I started thinking about getting up earlier for shows to get camera ready versus throwing on a hoodie and rolling in 5 minutes before the show starts. And that was definitely more my speed, even back then. So I went with radio. And when I graduated from Columbia, I got an internship at WLS AM 890 here in Chicago. I worked there for 5, 6, 7 years. I ended up working with guys like Rokan, Richard Roper, and Steve Dahl. And when Steve Dahl got to LS, he had a podcast network already. So he had established it back in like 2009 or 10. And the person running it, the administrator, she left while Dahl was at LS. So he needed somebody to step in and run the network. There were like 5 shows, his included, which he did every day. And that was really my crash course into podcasting. He hired me on to replace Kylie, who was running the show, and that gave, for a year, I was fully responsible for the recording, the audio editing. I would sometimes jump on the mic with Steve and Brendan and Dog whenever they felt like, dragging me over the coals for something or they needed some content. They would bring me on there, and then I would do the social media stuff and publishing, dealing with customer support, that kind of stuff. So it was all really back end, as well as a little flashes of on the mic. And the more I did that, I decided after I was done, I went into another podcast with a friend of mine that was kind of comedy-based. It was more improv, vocal work, called Boxcar Buddies. We did that for 2 years. And then when I was done with that, I knew I wanted to try one solo. And this was right around 2019, 2020. So Illinois had announced that they were legalizing. I was still working in radio, doing news, doing traffic, and I knew I wanted to do like a podcast and potentially do one solo. Cannabis is something that I've used for almost 20 years. I started using it when I was like 18, 19, and that, all of a sudden, it was a light bulb moment where I was like, okay, Illinois is legalizing. There are other states that have already done so. This movement is happening here. And what I'm not seeing are the legacy media channels, TV and radio, really bringing valid conversations, valid in my estimation, about what quality of life improvements cannabis can offer people. It was instead continuing coverage of the same old stereotypes. A lot of, I don't want to say fear-mongering, but there was a lot of displaying of the dangers of cannabis or sort of talking about it in the way that the old propagandists last century did. And so I decided I wanted to have the conversations that I'd had with people at parties using cannabis, those who'd been on the stoner journey like I was, who discovered how good it could be. I wanted to bring those conversations to more people so that maybe they would decide for themselves to give cannabis a shot. And that's kind of what led me to starting the show, yeah.
Fascinating. WLS was good in those days. I miss those days.
Man,
Con,
yes.
Doll,
it was
real characters.
It was really special, and I mean, running. I would do like White Sox games, and with the Bulls with like Chet Kopic. I was on with Bruce and Dan in the morning. I met a lot of and worked with a lot of great people. John Cass, the Tribune columnist, did a show with Jake Hartford, and I'll never forget. Jake was doing Saturday mornings, and he was by himself, and it was right around daylight savings time. Right? It was right around like November. And so he gets on the mic. It's like 5 a.m. on a Saturday. And since it's November, we're falling back, right? We're going back an hour. But he jumps on the mic and says, okay, get ready to change your clocks. We're springing forward or we're falling forward. And the phones just lit up because everybody wants to correct the guy on the radio when he's saying a wrong thing. And so I learned, and that was the whole show. It was 3 hours where Jake literally was just like, oh, we're falling forward. And people were just calling to tell him, hey, man, actually we're falling back. You're going the other way. And I was just like so taken aback. I was like, wow, you loaded the phone lines this early on a Saturday just because people are up and they're listening and they really want to dive in and tell the guy on the radio that he's wrong. Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of good people, a lot of lessons, but how about yourself? What got you into podcasting? How did you get here?
Well, I've been podcasting for a long time. I've always I come from technology. My degrees are in software engineering, and I worked in startups, and I did a lot of sales, startup stuff. But I have always, Don, I've always loved radio. I've always loved talk radio.
For sure.
I've learned a lot from that. I was an avid NPR listener for many, many years, and I'm an audio learner, so I naturally fell into podcasting, and I have a podcast that I've been doing for over a decade on selling, on B2B sales, called Sales Babble. But this podcast, the Cannabis podcast, actually started for a different reason. I had started growing cannabis about maybe 6 years ago, a buddy of mine and I, and we actually got pretty darn good at it, for being amateurs. Right?
Yeah.
And then we were talking about but from a tech background, we were like, we think there could be some products that maybe we could sell in this industry, but we need to build a network in the cannabis industry, and it was impossible to do that. Because you weren't allowed to get into a dispensary very easily. You couldn't visit anybody easily. I didn't know anybody easily. And we were just mystified on what to do. But then it struck on me. I'm like, I wonder if I could use a podcast as a mechanism, as a means to build a network. I attended the Cannabis Business Times conference. It was a few years ago in Las Vegas, and I was able to get a free pass because I was considered media.
Right,
I'd done this before, right? So I could go for free. So all I got to do is pay for my travel and living, and I was kind of passing through there anyway because this was kind of when COVID was starting to get done. This is. And I was driving through there anyway. We're working my way west, and I just started interviewing people in the trade show and people that I would meet at it. And I probably got a dozen interviews in, just 5-6 minute interviews on it.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, that led. I talked to those people. Who do you think I should be talking to? Talk to those people. Who do you think I should be talking to? And eventually, over the last 3-4 years, however long we've been doing this. I've built up quite a network in the cannabis industry. I know a lot of people in the cannabis industry. A lot of people know me. Last week I was at MJ Unpacked down in St. Louis, and it was just so fun to bump into people that I've known for quite some time. Chicago people who were down there, and just chatting with people. People want to know, well, who could I make them up with? Who could I network with? Who could I how can I help this industry? Which was kind of more or less, I started this podcast with the idea of it being more of a hobby than a real business.
Mm-hmm.
But with that said, I've got people looking to start podcasts that I've met through this,
Yes.
which I help facilitate people run podcasts. So it's been an interesting journey, using podcasting as actually kind of almost like a sales and a marketing. I don't have that. I don't get that terrific voice and smoothness that you have, Don.
Thanks, man.
I'm a true professional, from Columbia.
Man, I appreciate you saying that. I do. And what's funny is that, I remember going to the school and stuff, and my family, I don't remember sounding differently. You know what I'm saying? I can't remember before Columbia, whatever my delivery was. But people have made note of that, getting on the podcast and just when I talk with people, they kind of, will make note of the radio voice and stuff. And it's just funny for me. I'm mentally, I feel like nothing changed. I feel like I was always like this, but obviously something did. And to your point about just talking with people and networking, I really do think that's kind of the magic of podcasting, is you have these conversations, you're meeting people. And in cannabis specifically, it's exciting because this is a burgeoning industry. We're really still warring against the prohibition. There's this state-by-state patchwork legalization. We're all hoping for rescheduling next year. But to be a part of this industry, which is still not yet, the prohibition still hasn't ended. And to be watching it unfold state by state, it's the majority of the country that state by state is choosing to do this. And to kind of have a podcast, which as we've been talking about, when you're doing it on your own, like we are, you make all these editorial decisions. You make all these decisions of who to talk to, what edits to make, what, in terms of philosophy of interviews. I work in the WGN radio newsroom now, and we always have debates about when you interview somebody, what audio do you cut out? You've got these limitations put on you by the time. You can only run in radio. You got 5 minutes for a segment to run an interview. So you got to cut this stuff out. But when you're trying to be true editorially, the decision of what to cut out becomes a really difficult one. And so for me, my philosophy podcast-wise is I like to keep a lot of the things in. I don't do a lot of editing unless somebody kind of stumbles over an answer or they ask me to cut something out or they want to restart. I'm more of the opinion hey, you know what? I'm just going to let what we talk about be out there and just kind of let that story build on its own. And there's really a feel of guerrilla journalism here when you're kind of doing your own podcast specifically focused on an industry like cannabis, because for me, being here, as well as still having a foot down in the legacy media of GN Radio, there's things that these people that I talk to and the events that I go to and all of this, they are still not yet comfortable doing that. They're lawyers for the company that owns them nationally. They can't take sponsorships. They don't want to do hardly any coverage. They want to just keep it very neutral. And I'm sitting here feeling like they're missing this major movement.
I totally feel this, and it troubles me to no end. I mean, multiple times. I mean, I'll tell people that I'm a podcaster, and I got this podcast on sales, and I'll go, oh, okay, that's cool. And I go, I also got this podcast on the cannabis industry, and most people will lean in and go, oh, that's interesting. Tell me about that.
Yeah.
But every so often, I bump into it, and people give me that look like, ew, ick, ugh. I can't believe you're doing that. And if that's not bad enough, I've actually interviewed people on this podcast who have been in this industry who have asked me to remove the episodes.
Wow.
Because they've moved on in their life. They want to do something different. And that in this cannabis history that they have is holding them back for one reason or another. And these are people who are just, I don't think what they're doing is unethical or wrong or anything like that.
Right.
They're just people that is realizing this is the reality of the world. There's nothing I can do about this. If I want to do this next thing, I gotta get rid of this past that I have, or try to make it difficult for people to find it.
Right.
And I'm happy to remove episodes or or edit something that people say in an edit. I haven't done that so much on this podcast. And so this stigma that we have that you're talking about, that your employers refuse to like acknowledge, it is very, very real. And I believe it's going to be around for quite some time, sadly.
Yeah, I feel you, man. I agree with you. I think you're right. And it is unfortunate because that stigma it's like this mental barrier. It's like this fake ethereal obstacle that propaganda from last century, somebody's chosen narrative. They told a story that was so popular somehow that the ripple effects, those stereotypes still exist in the connotations today, in the collective consciousness. And as you said, it's hard to undo that. Very hard. When people have accepted a story that's told to them, it's sometimes it can be really hard to change that narrative. And we're seeing that live before us with cannabis right now. This tug of war we're doing, between what's true about cannabis, it's really a difficult line to walk. And I'm sure that you mentioned the people that you've had on the podcast who maybe have expressed some hesitancy or regret or whatever about doing the interviews, and they want to move on in their lives. It sort of, reminds me of like those employment drug tests, right? Where it's like, hey, I'm doing this thing on the side, but like they want you to show that you're not some kind of user of that. And it's so weird now that we have states that have legalized it, and some companies can still conduct those drug tests because they're private employers and whatnot. Yes. But this patchwork and the notion of people sort of waking up and realizing like, hey, this was a part of my life, but now I want to do something else, so I need to cut ties with that. I've had one person do that on my show as well. And it's just, it is just discouraging, because what I think you and I both want, and so many people in this space, we just want normalcy. We don't want those icky looks like you're talking about. We don't want somebody to kind of second guess our character because this is a substance that puts us in the right state of mind that we want to be in. It alters us in the way that we want to be altered, whereas alcohol and cigarettes and sugar and caffeine have been so normalized and allowed free reign in society. Nobody looks at you sideways if you're having a drink at a party. They do look at you sideways if you're not having a drink at the party. That's how normalized alcohol is.
I mean, I'm a home brewer, so I like to buy brewery T-shirts, and I'm kind of fearless. I'll wear them anywhere. But I think twice sometimes when I put on a cannabis shirt, because I've got a bunch of them.
Yep.
And I'm like, if I'm going to a cannabis event, I'm happy to dress up in my cannabis wear. But I do think more. I am more careful. Like, well, who am I going to be bumping into today? Do they really want to see that cannabis leaf?
Right.
It's kind of like, but it's just kind of like a lot of stuff. If it's raining outside, I go, ugh, I guess I got to wear a coat. I guess I got to bring an umbrella. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, out there in the world, people are going to judge me and change their behavior if they think I'm some kind of like a pothead.
Yeah, totally. It's so convoluted, and this narrative that persists, we're talking about this stigma. There are so many people, so many productive, successful people, and even just average everyday people that use it in some way, whether it's just whether it's moderate to get help sleeping at night. That was something that really drew me to it back when I was, first starting to use it. The dealing with social anxiety or the stress, or even physically recovering from some injury or just like soreness from exercise. These various quality of life things that people might turn to cannabis for, there's nothing there inherently that makes it wrong, and yet that's the accepted narrative. That is still the most popular viewpoint around cannabis, is that if you've made the choice to use it for a very legitimate quality of life issue, that somehow reflects poorly on your character. And we just know that to be untrue. And yet it feels like out in the world, you're banging your head against this wall, knowing that it's not true, but the rest of the world is telling you, oh no, that is true. You know, it can be very discouraging for sure. And doing a show about it, I'm right there with you. Sometimes you want to, you try and promote this. You want to try and shed light on people doing good work in the industry and all this stuff. And, talking about advertising, marketing these things, it's still so limited and still so squeezed. Even rescheduling may not move it to the place that, we really want it to be.
And what I learned at MG Unpacked was rescheduling it is less likely than it would have been otherwise. So we could be here for quite some time. And if you look at these two states, which I find interesting, this is a very American thing, right? Because we're so state centric. Even though it says "we the people" in our in our Declaration of Independence, it's more like "we the states."
Yes,
So
agreed.
You look at a state like Wisconsin, it's the Tavern League that's really stopping cannabis because they're concerned, and rightly so. The more people smoke, the less they drink. That's just a fact.
It's been shown to be true. You're absolutely right.
It's like Indiana, which is just kind of a laggard when it comes to any kind of social change. That's just a part of that culture.
Yep.
Of that state. It's a very rural state. They don't want to legalize it for different reasons.
Yeah.
It's just different. So this is a weird country, John, isn't it? It's just a weird
It
country.
is. Yeah, totally. It totally is. It's great for so many reasons, but then it's so ass backwards sometimes on some other ththings where you're like,
ass backwards is exactly the right term.
Yeah.
So maybe we should start to wrap this up. I don't know. Did we get anything accomplished here?
We had a great talk. I always think a good conversation is definitely an accomplishment in itself. But so as you say, let's wrap it up. I would say if you mentioned that people come to you wanting to start a podcast, for instance, what advice do you give them? What advice would you give somebody? What have you learned podcasting on your journey as you have?
Well, I think what's interesting about podcasting is the vast majority of the podcasts don't last more than 10 episodes because people realize it's more work than they think.
100%.
Just separate. A lot of it you can give away. You can give it to people like me to do the editing and stuff like that. But just the setting up of the interviews and picking who those people are and doing these kinds of conversations can be a big time suck. And you can't delegate that. You can't delegate your voice and your thoughts and who you want to speak with and how you want to connect with people who really matter. So with that in mind, if someone really wants to start a podcast, if the podcast really takes them where their business is or where their passions are, they will be successful. But if it's kind of set off to the side, like if your ideal client is not your ideal listener, it's highly unlikely you're going to be able to keep at it. But if they are aligned, podcasting create opportunities that you could never get otherwise. I've found that I can practically get anybody I want on my podcast because people feel honored for the opportunity to be on a podcast, and it allows them to speak their minds, to speak their truth. And that's a very powerful, it can be a very powerful tool because once you create a conversation with someone, lots of things can then happen. So I think, did I answer the question?
You did. I think I think you had some valuable insight in there, Pat, actually, because I think I was going to say something very similar, which is the fact that I think most of the things that people get hung up on when they start is that, as you pointed out, it's a lot more work than they thought it was before they get into it. And again, somebody coming from where I did, I kind of knew what I was getting into because I had done it on a more professional level, and I saw the amount of work that goes into it. And on a professional radio show or like the podcasts that are really high production values, cranking out stuff maybe daily, a lot of them have a team of people, just like radio and TV shows. You have multiple producers. Yes. You've got somebody responsible only for booking guests and thinking of bits. And then you've got somebody else who's doing all the editing, who records the audio, who cuts it up and then maybe publishes it. Then you got somebody else doing social media, filming videos of the stuff, putting that out there. Then there's the hosts. So a lot of these things have these big teams. When you go into it on your own, so many people don't realize what they're signing up for. And I think that gets at the point you were talking about where a vast majority don't make it to 10 episodes. And I know one thing that I saw with really all my podcasts was that when you hit the 40 episode mark, you get past 10, and if you can get to 40, that seems to be a point where people realize that you're in it for the long haul, and your audience kind of responds to that. I've seen an uptick in growth after like that 40 episode threshold, and it's been across the themes, whether it's comedy or cannabis or news or whatever else. It seems like once people know that you're there to stay, they'll tune in a little bit more, or they're a little bit more loyal to what you're doing. But that getting from 0 episodes to 40 can be kind of really tough for a one-man operation.
How many do you have?
Right now, I'm about at 100 episodes. How about you?
Awesome. I think I'm at 150 some.
Very nice. Yeah, that's big, man. It's big. And I think as Pat pointed out, and I think just as we're kind of talking about, if you are passionate about the topic that you're talking about, and if you're talking with people whose conversations you just would enjoy having, that is really the recipe for just success and fun podcasting. But if you're not there, if it can start to feel like work very fast. And in terms of the monetization, that's a whole nother discussion. And
whole different thing.
Yeah, it's a whole different thing. And believe me, there's no guarantee of it one way or the other. And so I think I've talked with people who want to get into that for that reason. And I immediately try and squash that, because I'm like, that's the wrong attitude to come in here with, because you're setting yourself up for disappointment, and you're definitely going to be out of it soon.
Well, if you can turn guests into clients, that's a very good way of monetizing a podcast.
Yes, it is. And we've talked before about kind of just growing your own brand. Like if you are, in the case of whether it's sales, or if you're in a very specific business niche and you're talking with, as you said, potential clients, you're networking and you're making those relationships, there is a way to use podcasting to kind of leverage future business and whatnot. But the vast majority of people podcasting don't really use it that way. It seems like it's more of an expanded blog or something, where it's just kind of you're doing whatever you're doing. But if you if you come into it with that in mind, like your sort of direction of building a brand, networking with a certain amount of people in a specific business, then as Pat kind of said, you can maybe turn them into clients. And that's a way to monetize as well. But it's not easy or quick to do that. So you just got to know that going in.
So I think then that's the next question is a natural question, is that if people wanted to find your podcast, listen to you, Don, where should they go to do that? Cannabis Man is available everywhere, and thanks for asking, Pat. It's on YouTube, it's on Spotify, Apple. It's free, and you can go to my website, donkleppin.com, KLEPPIN, and I've got links there. I also recently launched a newsletter, The Weekly Chronic, that kind of goes along with Cannabis Man as like a companion piece to get to some of the news that doesn't make it onto my shows, do a little behind-the-scenes stuff, extra product reviews. So that's been kind of fun. It's a different medium for me, writing versus talking. But either one of those places is, you can get the podcast or the newsletter pretty much everywhere. If you Google Cannabis Man or The Weekly Chronic, chances are those links will come up. Cannabis Man. And how about you, Pat? What's the easiest way that they can find the Cannabis Advocate podcast? It's very, very similar. It's Cannabis Advocate podcast. I'm on all of the streaming places that you find where you listen to your favorite podcasts. Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, Spreaker. The website is cannabisadvocatepodcast.com, and I have all the links to every guest that I've ever had. I'm also I'm very vigilant on LinkedIn. The Cannabis Advocate podcast is really a business podcast about the industry. It's really focused on people in that industry, founders, executives, managers, people who are trying to, and people who want to get into the industry. And I should say this too. We also talk a lot about hemp. I'm very interested in industrial hemp.
Yes.
I actually believe it's a bigger market than recreational cannabis.
Yeah.
So we talk about that too. So people in that space, you can find that in the cannabisadvocatepodcast.com.
Beautiful. I love it. And I'm intrigued by hemp too, Pat. I know we're wrapping this up, but I'll just say, like, it's fascinating to watch these attempts at hemp product bans sort of play out too. In like California, there's been talk of it here in Illinois. It's just another wrinkle to this whole debate about legalizing cannabis.
That's a whole different thing. This has been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed today's conversation. Thank you for taking a moment out of your day.
Oh, my pleasure, Pat. I always love talking with you. Thank you for sitting down too, and just keep up the great work, man. You're doing really good stuff. I know that podcasting it's up and down. We both know it can be rewarding, but also taxing. But I think I still believe like what we're doing for cannabis is important. The little ways that we can just normalize and try and kill the stigma. This is an important fight to have, and just in our own little way with these podcasts, I think you and I are doing it. So just keep doing what you're doing, man, and I hope to see you soon.
Preach, brother, preach.
Right on. All right, buddy.
Take care. High five.
High five. And there it is, listener. I want to thank one more time my guest, Pat Helmers of the Cannabis Advocate podcast. That was my first time doing kind of a crossover interview in the style that we did. We both knew that we were kind of recording an interview for our respective shows. And so that's why we kind of handled it that way, where we were just dueling questions a little bit and both kind of taking time to answer. But I highly recommend listening to Pat's podcast. He does a lot of great stuff. As he mentioned, he's got a vast network in the cannabis space after these past few years. He has definitely successfully, I think, moved his skills from sales. He's taken that into this podcasting space, and he's doing a lot of great work advocating for the plant as I'm trying to do as well. So if you're into what I'm doing here, definitely worth giving that podcast a check out as well. And I'm hoping to see Pat at the after party from Benzinga coming up next week here. Now it's time to wrap up some news headlines, as I like to do at the end of these episodes. The first one, some pretty big news here from the Marijuana Herald. This article came out Saturday, May 31st, and it was written by Anthony Martinelli. The headline is, "The U.S. Supreme Court could realistically end cannabis prohibition in the near future." As I tend to do, I'm not going to read the entirety of this article. I'll just give you a little bit of the start. I've linked it below. Please follow along or read at your leisure later. On May 27th, the first U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals rejected a lawsuit by Massachusetts-based cannabis business seeking to overturn the federal ban on marijuana. The plaintiffs argued that the federal prohibition is outdated, citing Congress's evolving stance and state-level legalization in 38 states, including Massachusetts. That would be medical legalization in 38. We're still at 24 recreationally. The court upheld the U.S. Supreme Court's 2005 decision in Gonzalez versus Reich, which affirmed Congress's authority to criminalize marijuana possession under the Commerce Clause, even in states allowing medical use. Jonathan Schiller, founding partner of Boies Schiller Flexner and chair of the Board of Trustees at Columbia University, who is representing the cannabis companies, said, quote, "It is fair to assume that we shall seek Supreme Court review," end quote. Should the court accept the case, it would mark the first time in nearly 20 years that the justices re-examine the constitutionality of marijuana prohibition. Now, if you listened to last week's episode, you heard that the Justice Department has also proposed its own rescheduling of cannabis down from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. So now, we've been waiting for this rescheduling hearing, which was initially started under the Biden administration, and they directed the Health and Human Services Secretary to look at rescheduling it. But the DEA inserted themselves into that process and seemingly successfully delayed the administrative review that was supposed to reschedule that ultimately. Now, as we sit here just entering into June of 2025, we have two different methods by which this rescheduling could happen: the Justice Department review or the Supreme Court taking up this Massachusetts case. As the article notes, Anthony Martinelli here, although most of the justices have not made public comments regarding cannabis laws, Justice Clarence Thomas has previously expressed skepticism about the federal government's inconsistent approach to marijuana policy. This was in 2021. In a statement, he argued that the federal prohibition on cannabis, quote, may no longer be necessary or proper, highlighting the contradictions in federal enforcement and the evolving legal landscape across states. That's all I'm going to read of the article. Again, I've linked it below, and there is more to it, a lot more context provided by Anthony Martinelli there. But it's very exciting. This is something that I thought was worth sharing with you, something that's worth keeping an eye on, and I will certainly share updates as they become available. But like I said, now we have 2 new paths by which cannabis might be rescheduled or outright decriminalized entirely. Still not holding my breath, but something to look forward to this summer. Moving on, the next article comes from marijuanamoment.net. Published on Saturday as well, May 31st, New Jersey lawmakers consider recriminalizing some marijuana purchases and sales. This is by Sophie Nieto Munoz, New Jersey Monitor. So they are republishing this on marijuanamoment.net from a New Jersey Monitor article. Lawmakers mulled Thursday whether New Jersey should ramp up enforcement against unlicensed cannabis sellers by passing a bill that would criminalize the purchase of unlicensed marijuana. The bill riled cannabis activists who say it would bring back the criminalization of weed that New Jersey's legalization law was supposed to end. Under the bill, sponsored by Senate President Nick Scutari, Democrat, it would be a third-degree crime to operate an unlicensed marijuana business and a disorderly person's offense to knowingly purchase from one. A person who leads an, quote, illegal marijuana business network would be charged with a second-degree crime. A quote here, we have a problem where people are opening up brick-and-mortar stores, small stores, unlicensed to sell these products, and quite frankly, they're just selling them, and the state is doing nothing about it, Scutari told the Senate Judiciary Committee Thursday. Quote again, we need to do something more about those brick-and-mortar stores, but we also need to continue to fight back against drug dealers because those are alive and well, end quote. Scutari spearheaded legalizing recreational cannabis, first introducing legislation to regulate it for adult use in 2014. After bills languished in the legislature, recreational cannabis was legalized in 2020 by voters, and Scutari was the primary sponsor of the bill to launch that legal industry there. So, that's all I'm going to read of this article, but I think that context gives you about all you need to know here. This senator who sponsored the initial legalization bills for cannabis is now the primary one who is responsible for this recriminalization. And I think that word is actually not accurate here, because they're not recriminalizing all of legal cannabis sales. They're recriminalizing some of it. And the reality is people should not be buying from unlicensed sellers anyway, because, and this gets into the hemp versus cannabis debates across some different states, the hemp market does not face the same stringent regulations that the cannabis market does. So when you go into a dispensary, you can look at nutrition labels like I just did for the Extract Labs gummies, and you can know what you're putting into your body. And you can rely on the experience that you had last time being the same one you'll get next time. That is not the case when they're unlicensed. And so enforcing unlicensed sellers and making it, criminalizing that, I'm actually for that. I have no problem with this. But let me know what you think. Call or text that number. And the final article I'm going to share with you this week comes from the Cannabis.net blog, of which I am so fond. This one kind of ties in with a story I did last week about New Mexico and Albuquerque specifically using cannabis tax revenue to fund universal basic income for a select group of they call vulnerable population, new moms, trans community, and some others. This article from Cannabis.net says, could federal cannabis legalization fund a universal basic income plan for all Americans? This was posted by Reginald Reefer, who I have had on this show, also on Saturday, May 31st. Boy, Saturday was a big day for some of these publications. Maybe they just came across my feed, and maybe every Saturday is big this way, but either way, Reg starts off by saying, while Texas lawmakers are busy criminalizing adults for THC possession, something else I've covered on the show here, and gift wrapping an $8 billion market for drug cartels, New Mexico is taking a radically different approach. As I talked about last week, they discovered something remarkable. Cannabis tax revenue can do more than just fill government coffers or supply school coffers or some of the other things that other legal states do. It can, as Reg notes, directly transform lives through universal basic income. As I discussed last week, the groundbreaking pilot program in New Mexico, they're using cannabis tax revenue to provide no strings attached cash payments to residents to the tune of $750 a month for 3 years. Now, a lot of these Cannabis.net articles are lengthy, and this one is no exception to that, but Reg breaks down how New Mexico is funding universal basic income and then extrapolates that to how it might scale nationwide. And this is a really intriguing proposal. It's not just everyone adapting New Mexico's successful model. There is some wiggle room in terms of how it might be implemented across different states. They might need to adapt the model to their specific priorities. And of course, a small quote-unquote vulnerable population in New Mexico is different than states with huge populations like California, New York, Illinois, XYZ. Obviously, the way New Mexico's doing it may not work for everybody everywhere. However, this could be a blueprint that other states use to create their own similar program. And as if you heard my episode last week, you also heard me say that since 2014, states that have legalized cannabis recreationally have collectively raked in $25 billion in cannabis tax revenue. $25 billion. I have not done the math, admittedly. Maybe if there's a math major out there and you want to, do a little side project to get back to me, I think $25 billion, you could take a chunk of that and you could fund universal basic income for, I think, every state in the union. Maybe not everybody, but just like Social Security and like some other stuff, child aid payments and stuff, not every person in the population would qualify for a UBI payment. But aside from those who don't qualify, if they're under 18 or they're above 65 and they're getting another form of assistance through Social Security or Medicaid, whatever, I'm sure there would be stipulations in terms of determining who qualifies for this. But in 10 years, $25 billion, and by the way, that market's growing, we could hit another $25 billion in 5 years this time because the market's expanded to other states. So my point is, this doesn't seem that radical. As we move forward, and, I know this is a cannabis podcast, but I'm really big into the news space, and I've been following AI for the last 2 years, ever since ChatGPT came out. I certainly, will utilize it from time to time myself, but the point is, there's a lot of debate right now about what future economies are going to look like as AI continues to grow and expand. And I think one of the things that's universally agreed upon is that employment is going to change. Some jobs are likely to be created. A lot of jobs are likely to be automated, thus putting people out of work. And so I know that universal basic income is something that a lot of people are looking at a lot more closely these days because of what our near future may hold in terms of employment. If cannabis tax revenue could be the answer to getting us through this transition period where AI is more widely adopted and our society changes because of it, I find that to have a certain historical justice. There's something about that feels just right. This thing that was stigmatized and denormalized for so long, this thing that was propagandized and that people still feel a shame for having as a part of their lives just because it helps them with something. Like I said, getting to sleep, body pain, XYZ, whatever your negative quality of life symptom is, if cannabis helps you with that and you, like I have and so many others out there, felt shamed, felt ostracized because you've used that and society tells you it's wrong, how fitting might it be that we reach this other point in society where AI comes, the first real new intelligence to compete with us as humans that we've ever had to really deal with? How fitting would it be that this prohibition ends and this plant that we've been using for thousands of years is ultimately responsible for kind of helping us through this other transition in the form of UBI payments to people out there who need it? Just a thought. I think that there's something wonderfully fitting about this. Again, I don't know if the math checks out. Maybe maybe you know somebody, or maybe you are better with a calculator than I am. And if you've got some free time and you want to get back to me on that, I would love to know what you think. What do you think about UBI in general, or AI? What the hell? Let's talk about that. We can open it up. But any of these topics that I brought up on the show, and that's all I'm going to read about that one, that article from cannabis.net is also linked below. Check that out when you've got some time. But as I said, dial the number, let me know what you think on any of those topics, and you might hear your text or voicemail on the show. But now, as we have finished up the news segment, it is time for my favorite part of the show, the time to take a deep breath in, exhale, really calm ourselves down after all that new information, all that good perspective, my great expert convo with Pat Helmers today. And we're going to wrap this up with a nice high haiku read by my friend, Reg Kiefer. Take it away, Reg.
Oh, thanks, Don. I'm gonna try one of those kava gummies when we're done here. This is called Dank Decisions. SCOTUS might get high just to understand the case. Pass the gavel, bro. Whoa. I wouldn't mind if they passed me the gavel, man. I always love banging those things. That sound is just there's authority in it, man. You know what I mean?
I do, Reg. I do indeed. And you're right. But I don't think they're just giving those away to people. I think that you have to be qualified to hold and wield that thing.
Oh, get out of here, man.
No, you can get out of here. We're about to finish the show up. Thank you for reading that, and thank you, listener, for putting up with it and listening to this episode and doing everything that you do every week and just getting through all of this oftentimes frustrating reality that we call life. But it's fun to watch this green frontier expand, and I'm really glad to be just charting this journey here with you on the Cannabis Man podcast. Want to thank my friends at Extract Labs for sending these delicious gummies. At least the strawberry and sour apple ones are delicious. This kava citrus, a bit of an acquired taste, but something unique. Do want to hear your take on those. I want to thank my guest, Pat Helmers of the Cannabis Advocate podcast. And as I've said, if there's anything that you had any thoughts about, if you want to get back to me on the math behind that UBI, or you have any questions or products you would recommend that I try, 872-269-2403 is the number. And I'll be back later this week with a bonus episode of the Cannabis Man podcast. Bye-bye. Cannabis Man is 100% originally crafted by myself, Don Kleppen. Original theme music written and composed by Yusu Kim, aka Goodson.